Good morning, everyone. I'd like to thank all of you for joining us this morning on this presentation. My name is Matt Baldwin. I'm the president and founder of Vertisys. We're going to talk a little bit today about the technology trends in 2020 and challenges that we've all seen. So without further delay, let's go ahead and get started. Just a little housekeeping. There will be a random prize drawing for a Yeti Cup after this webinar. If you have any questions during the presentation, feel free to type it into the Q&A text box. We have a couple of other presenters that are going to be monitoring those questions. If we run out of time, we'll be sure to follow up with you after the webinar through email, or if necessary, we can give you a shout. If you have any technical issues, just use the chat feature. A couple of my co-presenters should be able to help you out with that. And if you're having issues viewing the presentation, you might want to refresh your browser. One other thing is that if you don't want to look at my mug throughout the entire presentation, I've got a little screenshot here. In the upper right-hand corner, you'll see my face. But you can minimize that picture so that you can see more of the presentation. So this morning, we're going to talk about a number of things. Here's our agenda. We're going to talk a little bit about Vertisys, just a quick introduction of who we are. We're going to talk about this year in general, some transformative technologies of 2020. Talk about the key technologies that are emerging, that are continuing to grow, and the cloud being one of them, small to medium-sized business trends, web conferencing, BYOD or bring your own device concerns, and of course, voice communications. So let's go ahead and get started. So who is Vertisys? Vertisys, we are an IT company built from the ground up as a service business. I started the business back in 1992. I was working for a company called PC Warehouse, located here in Marietta, Georgia. And they pretty much closed their doors in 1991, and I was stuck looking for a job and thought I would give it a go. And so I'm very fortunate to still be here today and doing what I love, and I love what I do. We are a service-oriented company. We built from the ground up as a service company. When PC Warehouse went out of business, I assumed their maintenance contracts for their customers and worked those contracts until the end, hoping that those clients would renew with Vertisys. So from the very beginning, we have been very service-oriented business. We have a small to medium-sized business focus. Our average size client is 20 to 80 users, and about 75% of our clients are law firms. We sell hardware and software, just some key vendors are Hewlett-Packard, Microsoft, VMware, Cisco, just to name a few. We are a solutions-oriented business, meaning we engage with each one of our clients to build solutions around the problems that they have with technology. In this year, the two biggest things that we're doing is cloud migration strategy, but we still do traditional, what I consider brick and mortar refresh, upgrading servers, installing switches and firewalls, upgrading software, and of course, providing support for all of our clients. We are what's known as a managed service provider, or an MSP. We sell a lot of products as a service. So when I know that in this day and age, you hear a lot of things about products and services that have that asterisk in front of as a service, but pretty much it's a monthly recurring revenue stream, and that's effectively when you see the as a service. After it, that's what we're providing. We also provide hybrid and private cloud offerings, traditional help desk support, where you can call into our office. We'll have technicians assist you and escalate as necessary. And we also provide a virtual CIO role in consulting. We sell voice over IP solutions based on cloud PBX technologies. Could be either on-prem, that is in your office, or we'll host it for you. And we're going to talk a little bit later about these technologies, but I just kind of threw mobility because that's really what it's all about this year. And of course, you have been invited to this webinar by TJS Deemer Dana. We were actually acquired by them late in 2019. So we are a wholly owned subsidiary. I met with the TJS management a number of years ago, and we had instant synergy. We realized very quickly that we have the same shared core values as the two businesses, and thought we would join forces last year. So I am here running Vertisys, and I will be here for a really long time, and really enjoy it. And I enjoy being part of the TJS Deemer Dana ecosystem. So as I was preparing and researching, I ran across a lot of great material as I was conferring with Dr. Google, pulling information together. Obviously, I ran across a lot of great statistics and graphs, but also a lot of great cartoons and pieces of information that I wanted to share. Wish that I could share them all with you, but we'd be here for 6 hours. So, but this pretty much encapsulates it, right? So the year 2020, it's still crazy. Election was a few days ago. We have no idea who the president is. Yeah, it's 2020. And that seems to be the ubiquitous answer for everything that goes wrong. So I thought that this cartoon pretty much summed it up. So let's put things into perspective. The year started out like any other year, and then all of a sudden this global pandemic hit. Many other things occurred. We had Australian bushfires that raged for months. Eddie Van Halen passed away this year. We had the royal exit this year, a stock market crash, BLM movement. There was a mysterious massive explosion in Lebanon. Ruth Bader Ginsburg passed away. Harvey Weinstein verdict. I love that he's in a wheelchair now. We impeached the president this year. I keep forgetting all these things. Kobe Bryant passed away, unfortunately. We had wildfires raging out on the West Coast. And of course, how can you forget about the murder hornets that entered the United States? Those suckers are big. And then of course, the biggest of all, a global pandemic that is the umbrella that's effectively masking everything that we do this year. It's the driving force behind what technologies are being developed. It's the driving force behind business solutions. And because of that, many consider this year to be one of the worst years on record. So just to put things into perspective, as I was doing research, I did actually find that there is actually a worse year than 2020. And I wanted to put things into perspective for everyone. So that to maybe add to the levity of the conversation. So let's talk about the year 536. When you talk about really bad years, you may think about, or bad times throughout history, you may think about World War II or the Great Depression, maybe the pandemic of 1918, the bubonic plague. But if you do a Google search and look for the worst year on record, 536 is going to come up. So let's talk about it. Basically, for 18 months, it was dark. There was a volcano that exploded in Iceland and it spewed ash and dust into the atmosphere that covered the entire northern hemisphere. There were a number of subsequent volcanoes in South America and in the Indian Ocean that exploded throughout that year and the 2 following years that made it worse. The global temperature dropped 35 degrees. So if you live in Atlanta in July, average temperature is typically 85 degrees. You had a high of 50 degrees. Total crop loss in the northern hemisphere. A year later, in the year 539 and 540, we had a plague, what's known as the Justinian plague, killed 35 to 55% of the population. Pretty bad times. It was the beginning of the end of the Roman Empire. And just to make things worse, it was the beginning of what's known as a mini ice age that lasted for about 100 years. So I think when you take all of that information and put it all together and then put that into perspective, thinking about the year 2020, I think that we can all agree that that year 536 is definitely the winner of the worst year on record. So let's talk a little bit about tech trends for this year. We read about technology every day. We talk about how we adopt technology and how we adapt to technology. And I kind of stumbled across this. This is kind of an interesting chart and pretty simple to make out. So it took 12 years for the first 50 million people to have a cell phone. 7 years for the first 50 million people to have internet, 4 years for Facebook and so forth. 19 days is all it took for the first 50 million people to use Pokemon Go. Pretty impressive. I think, what that really says is that we are learning to adapt to technology very quickly as a society. So it's kind of interesting. So let's talk a little bit about the tech trends that we're seeing emerge and their practical use this year. So we talk about AI, artificial intelligence. If you have a smart speaker like Alexa, if you use a spam filter, if you use mobile check deposits, you have a blood glucose monitor, all of these technologies use artificial intelligence. IoT, or Internet of Things. These are typically small electronic devices. They could be embedded in your refrigerator, multiple IoT devices in your cars, bike helmets, smart tennis rackets, if you have a smart door lock in your home, all the way up to the intelligent concrete mixing sensors that will detect just the right amount of moisture content and so forth when cement is being mixed inside of the trucks. Edge computing is another emerging technology and that we're starting to see today. Specifically, it is designed to bring the compute a little bit closer to the actual equipment that is and sensors. As an example, we're starting to develop autonomous vehicles, semis, and so forth. And the idea that semis will no longer have drivers is a pretty scary thought. But so those semis actually have to be able to talk to each other. They have to be able to talk to the cloud. They have to be able to make decisions very quickly. And what edge computing allows us to do is take all of those IoT devices that are on that semi, and those devices will talk back to a edge compute device that's also on that semi, and then it will communicate directly back to the cloud or back to the headquarters for the company that's running that semi. So it's being used today. One of the most exciting trends that I'm seeing this year is in aerospace. We see companies like SpaceX and Blue Origin building reusable rockets with the sole purpose of colonizing the moon or colonizing Mars. And it's amazing technology. But one of the things that I'm seeing evolve from this is SpaceX has a product called Starlink, and for a number of years now, they have been shooting satellites into orbit, usually about 50 to 60 at a time, and with the goal of being able to provide internet access to anyone around the globe, regardless of where you are. So if you can imagine having a 5G signal in the middle of the Sahara Desert, that will be available for the price of $99 a month. And we're talking about fast internet. We're like 5G speeds, 100 meg per second of bandwidth. So really incredible stuff. And this is happening now as I speak. So, and you can look up Starlink, really interesting technology. I talked a little bit about 5G. Every commercial from Verizon and T-Mobile and AT&T is about 5G devices. It is the latest generation in technology, but what 5G is really all about is that infrastructure. Those towers that you see all have to be upgraded. So it does hold a lot of promise, but the reality of it is that we're at the very, very early stages of that deployment of 5G technology. So don't expect to see when you get that new iPhone this month, don't expect to see that performance that they keep talking about of 100 meg plus download speeds on your cell phone. It's going to come, but it's going to take a little while. Really, the biggest thing about 5G is what they call low latency. Really, all that means to you as a consumer is that today, with older generations, we have to create more and more cell towers to provide coverage for saturated areas, where areas are large amounts of cellular devices are trying to connect to those towers. What 5G promises is that they can have less towers, but be able to provide the same amount of coverage. So really amazing technology. They're rolling, like I said, they're rolling it out today. There is a lot of, China is probably pretty far ahead of us in terms of their rollout of 5G, but we're catching up quickly. And of course, one of the last things that I did want to talk about in terms of emerging technologies is the idea of autonomous vehicles. So one of the really interesting things that I found out when I was doing research about this is that there are actually 5 levels of autonomous vehicles, actually 6 levels, ranging from 0 to 5. The first thing that most people think about with autonomous vehicles is a Tesla. Tesla has a technology called autopilot, and you may have seen some videos where people are driving down the interstates of California asleep in their car, in their Tesla. That is actually what's known as level 2 of the 0 to 5 range. Level 0 is in most of our cars today. It is can be just a warning, could be a lane change warning or something like that, where the car will vibrate the steering wheel or move the car back into your lane. That's actually level 0. The Tesla with autopilot today is actually level 2. So as you can imagine, 3, 4, and 5 will be absolutely amazing when we get there. Level 5, just so you know, is steering wheel optional. So once we get to that point, you will see the convergence of almost all of the technologies that I previously mentioned. All of these, artificial intelligence, IoT, edge compute, and 5G, all kind of come together to realize what a true autonomous vehicle will be. It has to use all of these technologies to be able to communicate with other vehicles, to communicate back to the factory and the manufacturer for firmware updates and software updates and so forth. So really kind of amazing technology. So let's talk a little bit about other technologies that we're using and adapting today. That was general global technology trends. Now we're going to start to talk a little bit more about how we use technology in 2020. So one of the things that seems to bring about a fair amount of confusion is the term the cloud. So I wanted to take a few minutes just to talk about what the cloud is. When I was preparing this presentation, I actually went through the entire presentation with my wife, and I asked her at the end. I was like, "Did you learn anything?" And so she really enjoyed knowing about what the cloud is. So hopefully, at the end of all this, you'll come away with something. But so we're going to be talking about a lot. So pay attention. So I found this quote. This actually was a quote from 2008, 2009, and I thought it was kind of interesting. It was actually by a guy named Larry Ellison, who is the CEO of Oracle. Kind of the interesting thing about this is that he would later, there are quotes a few years later, like in 2010 and 2011, that he actually invented the cloud. So he kind of changed the tune along the way. And obviously Oracle is now delivering a number of cloud-based solutions. So I thought that was kind of interesting. So let's define the cloud. And this is probably the best description that I have seen, the best way to describe what the cloud is. So it allows users to access applications, information, and data across the internet. And any company that offers reliable cloud technology, allowing for computing to be done in a much more shared way, as the cloud is a service rather than a product. So effectively, when you think about the cloud and purchasing products or solutions from cloud providers, you're actually getting a service and not a product. And then to illustrate this even more graphically, effectively, this is what it is. So whenever somebody talks about the cloud, really what we're talking about is massive data centers with a lot of servers. I snapped this picture of our data center here in our office in Marietta. No, not really. But that's effectively what the cloud is all about. It is data centers distributed across the globe with a lot of servers and massive connectivity to the internet. So let's talk about 3 different types of cloud offerings. You have what's known as public cloud. And public cloud are technologies like Amazon Web Services, AWS, Google Photos. Most people are on Office 365 or some variation of Office 365. iCloud, Dropbox, Azure. There are hundreds and hundreds of public cloud offerings out there. So public cloud effectively is a business will build a lot of hardware and storage and network, put it all together in a facility, and it's shared with other organizations. You may see acronyms like software as a service or infrastructure as a service or platform as a service, a lot of these acronyms, but effectively, a lot of these public cloud offerings have software, are offering these services. The advantages of public cloud obviously are lower costs. You don't have to maintain it. You don't have to pay anybody to maintain it. That's part of your monthly agreement. It's highly reliable, and it's nearly unlimited scalability. So as your business grows, you can continue to purchase more services from these public cloud providers. And obviously, if your business shrinks, conversely, you can reduce those services. So let's talk a little bit about what private cloud is. Effectively, it's resources that are used by a single organization. It's physically located either in that customer's data center or maybe a third-party service provider. Some people may call that a co-location facility. It's maintained on a private network so that no other organizations can see it, by one organization. And your typical private cloud consumers are government agencies, financial institutions, as well as mid to large size organizations. The advantages are obviously flexibility because they own the solution. They have absolute and complete control over it. It's a little bit more scalable when compared to traditional on-prem solutions. And so, we see these organizations, a lot of these organizations like financial institutions and government agencies, gobbling up areas of data centers to host all of their servers. So the third, which is hybrid cloud, is what most of my clients have today. So they may have a server sitting in a server room somewhere. They may also be on Office 365. So it's a mixture of computing, storage, and services made up of both on-prem equipment, as potentially private cloud and public cloud all at the same time. And like I said, 90% of our clients at Vertisys are here. The advantages are obviously you can control, you have a little bit better control because you have a mixture of on-prem equipment as well as that public cloud or private cloud offering. It's fairly cost effective. You can run those servers until they, effectively crumble to dust until the end of life. And then obviously as they go end of life, EOL, you have the ease of transitioning to the cloud so that it's not quite as overwhelming because you're able to gradually migrate your software and services into various cloud offerings. So it's a little bit about different types of cloud solutions, and you may be reading about these things on a daily basis. So hopefully this helps give you a little bit better understanding of what these are. So this next section that we're going to talk a little bit about is, and I kind of coined each section, where's your server? And this year especially, when we started sending folks home for a quarantine back in February, it really changed. Obviously, it changed everyone's lives. It changed our business plans, short-term and long-term business plans. But as we started to get back to business and I started talking to customers, it really changed the trajectory of what their decisions were going to be for this year and the coming years. So let's talk about, true small to medium-sized business technology trends. I love this picture because most of you have seen something like this. This is your traditional, what I call brick and mortar, right? You have a telephone closet or a server closet somewhere in your building. There's wires hanging across it. You see storage boxes sitting around filled with who knows what. The thing that I like most here is that there's that single keyboard sitting there, just poised, ready to fall on the floor. It's holding down the servers and that battery backup underneath it. So I love this, but this is actually a client that we took on last year. It's a lot cleaner now, but this is actually a real picture of a client that we took on. But it is a very good example of that traditional brick and mortar technology and server room stuff. How much does it cost to cool this, to back it all up? What are you paying per square foot to have the real estate to put this equipment? So these are all questions that you have to ask yourself, before putting new servers in there, spending all that huge cash outlay to purchase new equipment. This year, more than ever, businesses are evaluating the need to keep servers on-prem. So, that's exactly what we're talking about. Are we going to replace the servers? Or are we going to migrate that to the cloud? As you progress through these difficult decisions, the driving force behind that is Sure, it makes all the sense in the world if you can rent a server in the cloud somewhere. But what about all the applications that you run? You may have time and billing applications, or what we call line of business applications. These could be QuickBooks, it might be a ERP product, Sage, Dynamics, any number of ERP products, CRM applications, litigation support products. These are those driving forces. This is what's going to enable you to create a silo for each one of those applications and determine how that data gets moved and what that strategy is to move that and create a path to the cloud. Obviously, another factor is going to be, what about your workforce? Did you, as a business, recognize in May and June, as we started to emerge from quarantine, that, yeah, I can run my business remotely. There's no need for me to have an office space. I can send everybody home. They have the necessary equipment to perform their job adequately, and we can still keep our bottom line, save some money, and then maybe even get rid of our office completely or reduce that footprint. So these are all strategies. These are all, extremely important concepts to think about as you're building that strategy moving forward. So at the same time that we're talking about physically moving servers, migrating to Office 365 or putting that database server on AWS or in Azure. We also have to think about, like, what are the security concerns that come along with this? Because as an IT company, 25 years ago, when I would engage with a client to talk about building a solution for them, the first thing that we always talk about is, okay, we're going to buy physical pieces of hardware and we're going to install them in your office. So we were talking about how those pieces of hardware were going to be configured, and we spent an enormous amount of time doing that. Back then, security really wasn't that important. We really didn't think about it. Today, we think about security. We think about security before we even think about implementing the technology. So I want to talk a little bit about about that security. What are those threat vectors? What do we need to be thinking about as we're coming up with that strategy, IT strategy for our business? So, MFA, you may read about this, multifactor authentication, compliance and governance, anti-spam, antivirus and anti-malware, social engineering, as well as intrusion detection and intrusion prevention. So these are 6 key areas of security that every business has got to consider moving forward. So let's dig into that a little bit. 2FA or MFA. So two-factor authentication, multi-factor authentication. Effectively, what are the things that you need to consider? If you're on Office 365 and you don't have multi-factor authentication enabled, you should probably talk to your IT person about it. Does that mean that every time you launch Outlook on your desktop computer, you've got to enter a code or enter a PIN? No, it doesn't. But if you don't have your smartphone or you're not in Outlook and you launch a web browser and connect to webmail, and the system doesn't recognize that as a normal place that you're logging in, it's going to send you a code, and you're going to have to use that authentication mechanism. So what is multi-factor? And effectively, all that is it's something that you know and something that you have. Many, many years ago, a company called RSA had a product. It was like a little fob, and it had a pin on that fob that changed, I believe, every 30 seconds or 60 seconds. And effectively, that was your secondary password that you would use when you would log into a system. That has evolved into, using your smartphone to, generate a code of its own, or maybe you get a text message with a PIN. You're using this every day when you're logging into your financial institutions. Even today, you can turn on multi-factor authentication in Facebook. So that way, if you log into a browser on a machine that's not trusted, it's going to ask you to enter a PIN. If you have a VPN, and you're connecting to your environment through a VPN, you should also be using multi-factor authentication. These are just given. If you're not, it's definitely something that you should consider. Companies like Duo Security, Google Authenticator, Authy, LastPass. I mentioned a little bit about RSA. These are all renowned, well-known companies that provide multi-factor tools that are out there, ranging from, as I mentioned, having a device that you carry, to a thumb drive, to calling you. That could be another factor that you can use. Actually physically calls your cell phone when you log in, and you just press the number 1 and it allows you to log in. So there's a number of different variations, but probably one of the most, the best level of security that you can have today. And it's very inexpensive. The second thing that we were talking a little bit about is compliance on the previous slide. Compliance basically is policy driven. If you take a credit card, if you're taking credit cards from your clients, your merchant is probably going to ask you to fill out every year a PCI DSS questionnaire that talks about how you're securing that information when you're taking those credit card numbers. If you're a healthcare provider, HIPAA, SOC 2, Sarbanes-Oxley, GDPR in Europe, these are all different levels of compliance, but these are all things that you have to consider as part of that go-to strategy moving forward. Basic definition, it's a series of controls and written policies that are implemented to monitor, detect, and prevent security vulnerabilities. So we work with every one of our clients every quarter to talk a little bit about varying levels of compliance to secure their network. Some additional security best practices. I had mentioned anti-spam. Is your anti-spam product, is it cloud-based, or does it require an appliance in your office? You got to consider that if you're going to start migrating to the cloud. The latest anti-spam products really provide a lot more than just a simple algorithm to determine if that email message is spam. For instance, internal threat protect, or awareness training, or brand exploit. And these are all features of the latest generation of anti-spam products. And if you're not utilizing those, you should probably talk to someone about it, especially the awareness training. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that in a minute. Does your anti-spam product have a mobile app so that you can look at your quarantine, from your smartphone and release messages? Will it sandbox attachments and explode the attachments, somewhere else and test it to make sure that it's safe before it actually delivers it to you? Is it an additional fee? And another feature, and this is pretty important, is email continuity. Really, all that means is that your anti-spam has a web-based platform that you can log into, or a portal, if you will, that you can log into to view not just your quarantine messages, but your live inbox. And does it allow you to respond to some of those messages? We recently had some power outages around Atlanta. ISPs were down, power was out. We had clients that, for whatever reason, they couldn't get to their mail servers that were in their office, but they were able to log into a web portal because they have a cloud-based anti-spam system and get to those emails. So this is part of your contingency plan. Antivirus, anti-malware, these are kind of like those ubiquitous things. Not a lot of people think about these things today, but they exist. You have to protect every device on your network with antivirus and anti-malware. DNS protection. DNS is domain name services. Very quickly, It is kind of like the phone book of the internet. When you put in Microsoft.com in your web browser, a DNS server will convert that name, Microsoft.com, to an address, to what's called an IP address. And DNS is what makes the internet work. If a PC on your network is infected with malware, a lot of times it will try to phone home to get instructions of what to do. One of those instructions could be to encrypt every file on your computer and every file on the network, and then ask for a $10,000 ransom. So DNS protection is really important. And of course, we're talking about best practices. Obviously, somebody monitoring every one of those devices and every one of those pieces of software on a daily basis to make sure that everything is up to date. Virus definitions are getting delivered, and all of your PCs and laptops have it installed. What's your biggest vulnerability? People. People are the biggest vulnerability. So 98% of cyber attacks rely on some kind of social engineering. Social engineering are basically the ability to, you may get a phone call, and probably most of you at some point, got an email that the CEO the CEO just sent you an email that said, hey, I need for you to go buy some iTunes gift cards and send them to I'm trying to send those to my clients. Can you go buy those and then send me the activation codes on each one of those cards? That is a type of social engineering. There are people that will physically call the receptionist for the purposes of getting information about your business. That's social engineering. 63% of successful attacks are actually coming from internal sources. That is, someone inside of your business is giving that person information that's allowing them to get control or steal information or take money. And this is kind of an interesting stat. 43% of IT professionals said that they've been targeted by social engineering. So that attack vector that I talked a little bit about, these bad guys are figuring out, it's guys like me, the IT guys, that have the keys to the kingdom. So what they have figured out is that if they can get to us, not only they're going to be able to get to my information, but they're going to be able to get to the information of all of my clients. So as an IT provider, we take security more serious than any of our clients, and we have to. Probably the most susceptible person in your organization is your newest employee. What we found is that 60% of IT professionals found that recent hires are at the highest risk of falling for some kind of social engineering technique. So what do you do? How can you mitigate those risks? There are companies out there that provide social engineering simulation. Many of you might be getting this already. You'll get an email from Google or Dropbox, or maybe even from your administrator, phishing, asking you to, trying to get you to enter your credentials or send them your credentials. That can be, we typically recommend that businesses have some kind of a social engineering simulation campaign monthly, just to keep people on their toes. And then obviously security awareness. Everybody should, make every employee go through security awareness. Every business should make their employees go through some level of security awareness training. The anti-spam companies are providing security awareness. The social engineering, the spam simulation companies are providing security awareness training. So you might want to look at the product, the services that you're already buying, and find out if those companies provide that awareness training. It's especially important to get those new employees trained on what your policies are, and not only what your security policies are, what your best practices are. for saving data and sending data outside of the organization. So one of the areas that we're going to talk a little bit about today, and obviously we're talking about 2020, when we sent everybody home back in February, everybody had to think about, how am I going to communicate with my peers? How am I going to communicate with my team? How am I going to continue to communicate with my clients when I can't leave my house? So talk a little bit about video conferencing and collaboration. I threw a couple of products. These are pretty pervasive products on the market. These are, Teams, Blue Jean, Zoom, GoToMeeting. These are all, the most pervasive, recognizable products on the market. Zoom, we're using today. It's the new norm for communicating external and internal. So it is, we had to adopt to these technologies. So when we got home, we had to talk about, as a business, we had to talk about, okay, what is going to be that one single product that we can use to communicate effectively, peer-to-peer, as a team, and with our clients. And obviously that had to be done quickly. So there was an instant adoption. So when we talked that previous slide, when I talked about how quickly we all, used 50 million, the first 50 million people used Pokemon Go. We were kind of doing the same thing with Zoom and Teams and WebEx and so forth. So, and of course, that all led to the Zoom parties, right? Forget about, throwing the wife in the car and heading down to the local saloon to meet with your friends. Let's just, kick back in the backyard. We'll throw the laptop out there and pop a bottle of vino and look at our friends make fools of themselves in a Zoom party. So seriously, let's talk a little bit about the collaboration components of web conferencing or video conferencing. I have a screenshot here of what we use here internally at Vertisys. We use Teams, and I'm only using this to illustrate a few things. The features that you should be looking for in your web or video conferencing solutions. Obviously, the ability to share a screen, the ability to have multiple webcams so that all attendees can be seen. Does it provide, VoIP, voice over IP capability? Does it have chat features, remote control, recording, high definition video? Can you brand it and put your logo on it? Can you embed, rich media into it? And obviously at the end of it, you want to know how it's being used throughout your business. You want to be able to run performance reports, integration with third parties. So here at Vertisys, sure, we use the chat amongst ourselves. We use it to create internal video calls between groups or individuals. It's extremely important to have that that visual to be able to see that person that you're talking to, because if you're just sending a message to them, you have no idea what their emotions are. You have no idea how they're reacting to that information. And so we here internally, we have a rule that anytime you call someone, whether they're 6 feet away in a cubicle or they're working from home, everybody has to enable their video. It just adds that, it's another dimension that's added to that. And it's really important that we still maintain that humanistic ideal that we're communicating with each other. We're not just sending each other messages. I had mentioned that we use Teams internally. We don't just use it just for video calls or external meetings with clients, but we use it to collaborate. So we actually use something called channels, which is something that is within Teams that we build for each one of our clients. And so when a discussion needs to occur relating to one of those clients, you just go into one of those channels and we put a message, and then everybody on that team gets a notification that there's a question been posted for that particular client. And so we're able to very quickly focus the discussion for that one particular client. Most people can jump right into that channel And anybody that's a member of that channel, which are typically the technical account manager, the salesperson, and the on-site help desk person, with a single click of a button, everybody in that channel can be on a video call communicating about that particular problem. So pretty cool stuff. So let's talk a little bit about security for web conferencing. I think everyone has heard about Zoom bombing. This came about really early in February, where, here you are, you're having a business meeting, you've got all your peers on and the boss is on there. Next thing you know, some knucklehead jumps into the Zoom meeting, runs across the screen wearing a toga. Effectively, when you create a Zoom meeting, it creates what they call a public ID. Each Zoom meeting has an identification number. What bad guys figured out is that people were posting those Zoom IDs on Twitter and Discord and Reddit and a number of other places, and they would just troll those social media platforms looking for Zoom IDs, and they would find that Zoom ID and then jump right on there and cause all kind of havoc. So what do you do to secure that? Number one, I know when I launched Zoom yesterday, there was a software update. They're constantly releasing updates. So anytime you see that irritating message, take 5 minutes, update your software. Use random meeting IDs. Don't use the same meeting ID or your personal ID every time you create a meeting. Waiting room feature. When you attended this conference today, you sat in a waiting room until we admitted you. That's one way to stop, would-be bad guys from getting into your meeting. You might want to disable the join before host feature, which means, you can't join a conference until the host starts it up. Lock the meeting after it started. And so I have a couple of folks that are assisting me with this webinar, and they lock the conference so that other people can't jump in after the fact. You can also limit screen sharing to hosts only, and that's enabled in this conference as well. So a little bit about web or video conferencing security, just some best practices. All of these are applicable no matter what platform you're using. If you're using WebEx or you're using Zoom or you're using JoinMe, all of these things have these shared meeting IDs and waiting room features and so forth. So things to think about. So as I mentioned, way back in February, we sent all of our employees home to work. What did they go home with? Do they all have laptops? Did they pack up their PC on their desk and throw it in their car and bring it home? Probably not. They probably had some type of compute device at their house. BYOD, bring your own device. So I wanted to talk a little bit about that today because it is a pretty major concern, both from a security perspective and from a liability perspective for businesses. So obviously, we needed to send everybody home. Yeah, I got a computer that I bought back in 2005. I'm going to use that. I'm going to install my VPN on it. I'm going to connect to my terminal server. I'm going to connect to my virtual desktop, or maybe I'm going to connect directly to my desktop in the office. So just a couple of stats. I didn't want to overwhelm everyone on this presentation with too many statistics, but I think this number is kind of low, but 82% of companies, let their employees use personal devices. 90% of U.S. employees use their smartphones at work. But this is really interesting, is that 40% of large data breaches are caused by a lost or stolen device. 50% of companies that allowed BYOD were breached via employee-owned devices. So we talk a little bit about, what devices are your employees using at home? And when we talk about BYOD, we're not just talking about a smartphone. We're talking about PCs, tablets, and smartphones, laptops alike. 60% of employees use some type of file sharing app. Could be Box.net, could be Dropbox, could be any number of things. File sharing apps to access and share company information. That's a huge vulnerability. That's something that has to be considered. Do you require all of your employees to have MDM or mobile device management on their smartphones? MDM is a tool that is used to force a PIN to be entered to unlock that smartphone. Or maybe it isolates corporate email on that smartphone so that if that device is stolen or the employee leaves, you can selectively wipe it, which means you can remove the corporate email from it, you can remove that MDM agent from it, the person can have their phone back, and their Google Photos are still intact. Are the PCs that you're allowing your employees to use at home, do they have the latest Microsoft patches? Are you training your employees to work from home? Do you have a bring your own device policy in place that defines a number of things? And it defines what the security, security awareness, it defines the practical, whatever your practical use policy is for, when you're working using that personal PC or that personal laptop. Do you have an inventory of what every employee is using to assess risk? So one of the things that we recommend to all of our clients early on is that, every person that's working from home, send us the information about that laptop or that PC or that tablet that you're using so that we can keep an inventory of it. And that way we can help mitigate a number of these risks. Are users, encrypting the hard drives on those laptops? Very simple process, very inexpensive process. Microsoft has a great tool called BitLocker that will encrypt that hard drive. It's really pretty quick. That way, if that laptop gets stolen, no one can pull sensitive information off of that device. Getting a little bit short on time. I'm going to speed up a little bit. So BYOD, what are those risks of bringing your own device? Out of the 70 million devices that are stolen or lost every year, only 7% of those are actually recovered. You can read the stats. One of the two biggest ones that I see are the bottom here. 65% of the companies that they have no capability to wipe those devices remotely if they're stolen. So when an employee leaves or that smartphone is stolen, they don't have that capability. That's what MDM provides for you. And of course, 76% of companies are not encrypting those mobile devices or laptops. So super important to think about. The last area that we're going to talk about today is voice communications or VoIP, voice over IP. Nobody likes to really talk about that old traditional phone, but those needs have changed. When you sent everyone home in quarantine, how were your employees communicating with clients? Were they just using their cell phone? Because of that, it's forcing a lot of businesses to rethink how they're using those smartphones, or what features does your existing phone system have? So got a couple of things that I just wanted to go over quickly. Things to consider when you're evaluating that traditional phone system that you have. Obviously, cost is going to be really important. Does it integrate with your CRM or other applications? Does it transcribe your voicemail to text? Does it obviously send you an email when someone leaves you a voicemail? Does it have what they call soft phone capabilities so that you can just run a soft phone on your PC, laptop, or smartphone? This enables your employees to call their clients from that smartphone app, and it has the appearance of coming from a business line instead of just coming from your cell phone. It also adds a degree of anonymity to that. So when you call your clients and you use that smartphone app, it shows up as your business number. They don't know your cell phone number, so you don't get those late night phone calls from clients. When you sent folks home, who is answering those operator calls? Do you have any call center needs? And obviously, and I mentioned early on, is the costs. So are you paying $800, $700 for a PRI or a primary array interface? Have you converted to SIP provisioning, which is really much more cost effective? What are your remote workforce needs? Are you sending physical handsets home with your employees, or can they just install a smartphone? Can they just install a soft phone on their desktop or laptop? Are they working from home exclusively? Or maybe you've downsized your office space, and when your employees come in, they're hoteling. How are they logging into those phones? So, number of things to consider. And then, what is that cost of sending a handset home with every one of your employees? So, how do you secure that VoIP system? Just like your network, you have to change your password every 6 months to a year. Make sure it's a strong password. Things like network address translation. These are a little techie, but basically it just obscures that IP address of that phone from a would-be hacker. Disabling that web interface on that telephone. Disabling, common ports on the firewall. You got to get your IT person or your network administrator involved in that. And then the biggest thing is disable international calling. International calling is really what these scammers are doing. Is they want to be able to use your phone system to make phone calls worldwide. Typically, they're going to attack during a long weekend or during a holiday or off business hours. And something important to consider is, does your phone system have the capability of alerting if there's a spike in activity in phone calls? So those are some quick things to think about to secure your phone system. So just want to leave you with one thing. Kind of getting back to the murder hornets thing. Found this cartoon, thought I would share it with everyone. Want to thank everyone for joining me today. I hope that you learned something along the way. I hope that I was able to impart some knowledge. We're going to send a follow-up email with the presentation details and additional information. As I mentioned originally, if you had submitted any questions, we will be more than happy to follow up with you directly. And again, thank you so much, and enjoy the rest of your day.